people of YouTube, welcome back to another edition of EmpLemon's Summer Bummer. So this year I went to Vidcon, and I really didn't know what to expect. I heard some good things, I heard some bad things, but most of all, I was too lazy to actually research anything about it. I joined up with local delinquent Rusty Cage, and we ventured out of the gloomy swamps of Florida towards sunny Anaheim, California. What happened next may shock you. Vidcon is actually pretty freaking epic.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Yo, what's up, everybody?
Needless to say, my expectations were blown totally out of the water, and I wanted to make a video sharing my experiences. So I took to Twitter and had my fans submit questions about Vidcon, and hopefully after this video, you'll all know a little bit more about it than I did going in.
Coming up, looking out, I'll survive, no doubt. Never fear, bring it on, break it down, what's in my way?
Well, this sucks.
Was it really as bad as people say?
This is probably the number one question for most of you. Is this whole place just infested with screaming kids and obnoxious egomaniacs? Well, not really. As far as conventions go, the clientele at Vidcon are pretty normal. Far more normal than most conventions I've been to. Like any big convention, it's crowded and loud. There are vendors and giant screens, so I guess if you don't like that, then you're gonna have a bad time at Vidcon and any other convention. Yeah, there are a lot of kids, but most of them I saw were under parental supervision. I didn't see any vloggers inciting riots either. After just half an hour walking around the convention, I realized that its notoriety had been cherry-picked and exaggerated, like many things on the internet.
Isn't VidCon just a corporate circle jerk for soulless content creators to make extra money and exposure?
This seemed to be another preconception of VidCon, that it's all a big, manipulative vanity project for rich YouTubers to get richer. I will admit that VidCon is a very corporate event. There's a ton of brands and merchandising and marketing involved here. But once again, this is true for pretty much any big convention. When you have a ton of people drawn to one place, there's gonna be companies trying to sell you stuff. As for the YouTubers, I would argue that VidCon does just as much to help grow small YouTubers as it does to help big ones. Small YouTubers certainly have much more to gain exposure-wise. Everyone already knows the big guys. It's the small, unknown channels that can benefit the most from networking. As for the money, I for one think it's great that the Odd Ones Out has hundreds of people waiting in line to buy his merch. 4 years ago, he was a nobody like most of you watching, and now he's making bank. It's easy to hate on the rich and successful, but we should celebrate that a guy like the Odd Ones Out can even be rich and successful. Regular people can't just become a movie star or pro athlete or CEO in a few years, but they can become a successful YouTuber. And I think we should appreciate how that's even possible.
But hey, that's just a theory.
What do you think about VidCon being owned by one of the biggest offenders of copyright claim abuse, Viacom?
I mentioned this in the last episode of YouTube Geographic, but VidCon is, in fact, property of Viacom, the most notorious copyright abuser in the history of YouTube. Do I feel dirty about giving my hard-earned money to a company like Viacom? Yeah, a little, but I would have felt about the same had I paid money to go to Disneyland right next door. Apparently, there was once a time when VidCon was a grassroots event run by YouTubers for YouTubers, but that time is long since passed. Every growing property is doomed to be bought out by a bigger, blander entity. That's just the way the world works. Now, I can't speak from experience, but after hearing other YouTubers who attended the event multiple years, the Viacom buyout did seem to make the event much more corporate and sanitized than in prior years, with a fairly heavy emphasis on marketing to children, which is a shame. But then again, that's exactly the same thing YouTube has been doing, so I guess it's somewhat fitting.
Did the overall environment seem more geared towards networking and business ventures, or more towards entertainment value and giving guests a good time?
If I had to estimate, I'd say the vast majority of the VidCon audience are fans, so it's no surprise that the venue is designed to cater to them. The primary selling point of VidCon is providing an opportunity for fans to meet their favorite YouTubers, That's how I imagine they make most of their money, so they're obligated to invest more in entertainment options. That's not to say, of course, that there aren't any networking or business opportunities. Those options are just far less intuitive. I found that most of the networking at Vidcon goes on independently from the convention at bars or parties around town. And I'm not saying that Vidcon is totally useless in this aspect either. It's the spectacle of the convention that brings in all the creators. You just have to make a lot of the networking happen on your own, which is why if you're a creator and plan on going to Vidcon, I'd recommend traveling in a group because the more connections you have, the easier it becomes to network with others.
With all the drama YouTube personalities like to thrive off of, did you find it really refreshing to meet and to know all these YouTubers aren't what they are online and more friendly in person?
I gotta say, the best part of VidCon for me was getting to meet and hang out with a bunch of great YouTubers who I've been watching for years. It was a little bit disorienting at first because I was only used to seeing these guys on screen. Looking at all these YouTubers in the same place felt like a fever dream at first, but eventually it was like hanging out with friends. Or maybe even beyond that. Sometimes when watching videos we lose sight of the fact that YouTubers are just people. Really interesting, unique, and creative people who are all connected by the simple passion of creating content. And I'm normally not one to enjoy parties or big social events, but talking to people at VidCon just felt so easy for me, something I've never really experienced before. It just felt so great to complain about getting demonetized without having to spend 15 minutes explaining what that means. It was definitely the most valuable part of VidCon for me.
Did you see internet historian's face?
Yes, I was able to witness the enigmatic mystery of the internet historian, and to no one's surprise, he looks exactly like his online avatar. Once I confirmed his identity, I was able to send my team of highly paid lawyers to his home in Dinosaur Island to demand retribution for his blatant theft of my downward spiral.
I call it internet historians. Southward facing drone rotation.
Come along with me on my Suicide World Tour.
Is it safe?
Yes!
Unfortunately, I recently discovered that Viacom also stole my spiral and I had to postpone Harold's legal reckoning.
Were you recognized at VidCon?
I don't believe a single person at VidCon recognized me by looks alone. Only through my voice and mutual friends could some people deduce who I was, and it was kind of fun surprising people like that. It was also helpful not being instantly spotted in a crowd of people, and being able to swap between getting noticed or staying incognito.
My name is Guy Incognito.
How uncomfortable are fan meetups?
So like I said earlier, I didn't really get openly recognized, so I didn't have to interact with many fans. I will say that when it did happen, it's as uncomfortable as the fan wants to make it. I gotta say that if any of you out there ever get the chance to meet me or any other YouTuber you like, it's best to treat us like a normal person. Please don't grovel or worship the ground we stand on. We're just regular people like you who happen to make videos. I'm fine meeting fans in a quick and casual setting, but anything more than that tends to freak me out a bit.
Did you cover your face with those madness glasses like in the Live Sodi podcast?
I was planning to because I thought it would make it easier for people to identify me, but unfortunately I left the madness at Mumpty Jones's house back when I visited in December. You know what? Come to think of it, that actually explains a lot.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, I'm not hungry anymore.
Were the content creators that have genuine care for their videos promoted more by YouTube? Or were generic obnoxious vloggers the main focus?
Yo, what's up, everybody?
It's interesting to look at which creators VidCon promote and which ones they tend to ignore. While the stereotype of popular YouTubers does tend to be the obnoxious vlogger type, it doesn't really reflect the promoted creators at VidCon. People like Logan Paul and Tana Mojo are rumored to have been banned from VidCon, and many ego-driven vlogger types seem to avoid the convention entirely. At first, there doesn't really seem to be a clear reasoning for which online personalities are represented at VidCon. There were a lot of storytime animators, cooking channels, ASMR people, and many others in addition to the typical vloggers you'd expect. Some of them are big and famous, while others I had never heard of. I talked about this with many people during my stay at the convention, and it starts to make more sense when you realize that a lot of these same creators are the ones who consistently show up on the trending tab. Now, at this point, it's important to note that Vidcon is run independently from YouTube. While the convention is affiliated with YouTube's brand, YouTube does not own or control what happens at Vidcon. So why then do we see the same people promoted? Well, I believe the answer lies within marketability and controversiality. All of the people you see promoted at Vidcon tend to be very marketable and non-controversial. Storytime animators are very popular among young teens and children, which makes them very marketable to that valuable demographic. Cooking channels are totally benign, and they most likely won't cause a political controversy that will cost the convention money. Business-wise, this makes sense for a venue that wants to turn a profit. Typically, no one from my neck of the woods gets any special treatment because I tend to hang around people who are a little more outspoken about criticizing the establishment, so it should be no surprise that we tend to be the ones who get labeled as unfriendly for advertisers. It's the same reason why I don't see anyone like me getting invited to speak at these events anytime soon. And yeah, it may feel unfair, but it's important for us to not harbor resentment for those creators who do get favored by the system. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Is it really worth the money?
Now, considering the cost of air travel, hotels, food, convention tickets, and other expenses, Vidcon can easily run you over $1,000 depending on where you're coming from. It seems like a steep price to pay for what amounts to a little more than a networking trip. Networking that's not even really guaranteed to happen. In my opinion, by paying to go to Vidcon, you're paying for the uniqueness of the event. If you're a fan, then Vidcon may be the only time you can meet up with so many of your favorite channels in the same place. If you're a creator, Vidcon may be the only time you can establish meaningful connections with so many of your peers. If you're strapped for cash or struggling to make ends meet, then you probably shouldn't spend that much on Vidcon because you're probably not going to see an immediate payout on that investment. However, if you're working your way up the YouTube ranks and you have some savings to spare, there's no other place where you can make friends with as many people in the community. It's difficult to place monetary value on friendships and connections, but in a highly cooperative setting like YouTube, networking here is likely much more valuable than anywhere else.
In general, what's the vibe you got from the convention and the surrounding people?
Well, if you're speaking of people you dislike, then you'd call them clout chasers. If you're speaking of people you like, then you'd call them opportunists. I was able to meet and talk to a lot of big YouTubers at Vidcon, but the most insightful conversations I had were actually with small YouTubers. Smaller creators are hungrier and they have a lot more to prove, which forces them to take a lot more risks. They can't just rely on following trends, they have to be the ones experimenting and creating them. Vidcon is ripe with this mentality of hope and opportunity. In the 1850s, people across the country dropped everything to venture to California in search of gold. The atmosphere of Vidcon feels largely the same way.
What was the most memorable moment during your travels to the sacred land of Vidcon?
This year's Vidcon had a ton of memorable moments. I got to meet a lot of new people, travel lots of new places. I got to witness Rusty Cage's psychotic hot dog eating contest. But for me, the moments I remember most are the simple ones. My most memorable moment happened when I was sitting down on the couch with Wang, Wavy Websurf, and Willie Mac. It was around 3 a.m., we were winding down from a big day of convention madness. We're all talking about YouTube, looking forward to the future. Just a bunch of guys from wildly different backgrounds, all united by the same camaraderie of making videos for thousands of strangers on the internet. Then one moment, I lean into them all and say, "That gamer from Mars is an absolute savage. This dude sponsored the downfall of Pro Jared with Vikings War of Clans. He does not care about what you think. He will beat you up, buy the rights to your video idea, and sponsor it with Raid Shadow Legends. This man is about to end all of our careers."
Attention all epic gamers, this is the Gamer from Mars letting you know that I've temporarily taken over EmpLemon's account. Let this be a permanent reminder for all of you listening not to talk about me behind my back and also not to leave your computer unattended at Vidcon. But speaking of cybersecurity, this video is sponsored by NordVPN. When traveling around on networking trips, you're bound to connect to a lot of unsecure public Wi-Fi networks, which could leave your information vulnerable to hackers. NordVPN encrypts your internet connection so that you can stop worrying about your data wherever you are in the world. Be sure to visit nordvpn.com/EmpLemon for 75% off the 3-year plan. I'll be giving Emp his account back now, in exchange of course for the revenue he earned from this ad reading. So now please stay tuned for more regularly scheduled content. And remember, if you mess with me, I will take away everything that you know and love.